as we move forward into tonight's conversation, all about honoring our Earth and sustainability, I wanted to read Food Recovery Network's land acknowledgement. Excuse me, I set myself up for that one. And also just a larger piece of Food Recovery Network, just to ground us. And so you can read along, or you can close your eyes, maybe take some deep breaths. So here we are. Food Recovery Network recognizes that food security, economic security, and climate justice are inextricably linked to racial equity, and achieving progress in any of these areas depends on addressing the root causes of these inequities. FRN is committed to racial equity and inclusion through all aspects of our organizational development and programming. We welcome, respect, and encourage the contributions of all individuals, celebrating diversity of race, color, ethnicity, ancestry, national origin, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, marital and familial status, language, mental or physical impairments and disabilities, military status, economic class, immigration status, foster care status, body size, criminal history, and other characteristics that are often used to marginalize individuals and communities. At Food Recovery Network, we acknowledge the land on which our headquarters, our office resides, is inhabited by the Kinwa Piscataway clan, and please excuse my pronunciation, also known as the Piscataway Canoe clan, who are the traditional inhabitants of these lands and waters long before we arrived and continue to reside here. And you can learn more about the tribal lands on which our chapters reside. There's a link there, native-land.ca. And we ask that you honor this beautiful land by joining us in committing to sustainability and promoting environmental well-being for everyone to thrive. To dig right in, I wanted to thank Angela, Priscilla, and Dominique for joining us. And I'm just going to go right through and have each of our incredible speakers introduce themselves. So maybe, Angela, we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Regina. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be part of this panel discussion today. My name is Angela Lin. I use she, her pronouns. Recently just moved to Chicago and started a job as the communication strategist at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. Before that, I was doing communications work in the nonpartisan C3 civic engagement space in Ohio. And before that, I was America Vista at a food bank. And before that, I was at the University of Michigan, which is where I was part of my Food Recovery Network chapter for 3 years.
Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. Priscilla, she, her, calling in from Oceti-Sakowin lands, also known as Minnesota, US. And I also was an FRN chapter leader at University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And that's how I met Regina and others. I work in the nonprofit space doing food communications, nonprofits who advocate for food sovereignty, food justice, and I also spend time in post-capitalist spaces. So happy to be here and stepping into a new role soon at East Phillips Neighborhood Institute as a community empowerment director.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Regina. My name is Dominique Mitchell. I use she, her pronouns. I am located in Springfield, Massachusetts, which I'm learning is lands to the Agawam communities. I am currently the data integration lead over at the Movement for Black Lives, really taking care of large sets of data. Prior to that, spent some time in the voter engagement space within higher education, specifically historically Black colleges and universities in the South. And then before that, was over at Food Recovery Network, working with many chapter leaders and chapters in progress to get them started in establishing a Food Recovery Network chapter. And then before that, I started a chapter on my campus at Barry University down in Miami Shores, Florida. So I'm really excited to be here with y'all.
Thank you all so much. And I have to say to everyone who's listening in, I've had the pleasure of knowing each of these incredible individuals for several years now, including Dominique being here at the FRN National Office as a fellow for 2 years. I've had the opportunity to have other conversations with Angela, Priscilla, and Dominique, and maybe Sarah might be able to pop some of those conversations into the chat so that you can also get to know these three individuals a bit better and understand what drives them. And I have to say, as CEO of Food Recovery Network, I've been doing this work for going on almost 11 years now. And just as also an extrovert, I know a lot of people. I just know a lot of, I love people. I want to know as many people as possible. But I have to say about Angela, about Priscilla and Dominique, three of the smartest people that I have ever met. And I'm so honored to call all of you friend. I'm just really thankful that you have done so much for FRN and that tonight we get to be in community with you as we talk about something that is so important. And when we were designing this conversation, I had some questions with the three of you in mind, as I had mentioned. And so for those of you listening in, we're going to get real. We're going to get deep. And tonight we are here together to honor Mother Earth. And so with that, the first question I have for all of you is, how does your identity shape your perspective on sustainability and equity? And whomever wants to start first, but I'd love for all of you to answer that question. We're going in deep right away.
I guess I can get us started here with identity, sustainability, and how it is all interconnected. I would say that growing up, I don't know if I actually had the language to say that life was sustainable, but there were little practices like the one drawer that had all of the plastic bags from when we went shopping, or the reuse of the country crock large size margarine container to be used for food, or just being mindful in those ways to eat leftovers and having a day that was spent with just eating leftovers and my mom wouldn't cook, as a way to use up what we actually have. And even in my day today as like a grown up, one of my methods is like to not spend money to buy more groceries, is to challenge myself. How many meals can I actually make with the ingredients I actually have? Because being someone who's transitioned from being a renter to a homeowner, there's a different level of being sustainable that's available that you don't fully get into when you are a renter, because there are so many barriers into sustainable practices like composting, like recycling, which some places don't don't have recycling happening because they're just like, we're just here to collect trash. So a lot of the circumstances that I've been in have helped to shape me in wanting to not waste as much food, to not put too much on my plate because my eyes are bigger than my stomach, or to just remind to friends, maybe we don't go shopping when we're hungry, but actually go in there with a list so that we don't have a bunch of food that we're throwing out because we, like I said, our eyes were bigger than our stomachs.
I still resonate with that. And I think I've come full circle, ironically, Dominique, to thinking of sustainability as a lifestyle. And I remember clearly in high school going into undergrad, like, okay, I don't like wasting food, but that's not a career. You can't have a career in sustainability. And I was proven very wrong, especially in the last 10 years, 20 years. There's a burgeoning field dedicated to sustainability practices, whole industries, right? And now I'm kind of flipping back to being skeptical, like, okay, Big Green has now co-opted the entire movement. Sustainability has always been a lifestyle, has always been a way of approaching our world. Why have we commodified it and turned it into a whole industry, just like wellness or fitness, right? So now I'm kind of trying to go back in a decolonial way to thinking about what have my ancestors brought forth? What do I carry in my identity coming from a family of refugees and immigrants from Vietnam? And I remember talking to my parents when I wanted to go to college, a college dedicated to food and ag and getting involved in food recovery. They were like, farming and ag is a poor man's career. Like, we crossed the Pacific to avoid rice paddies. How could you ever want to go back into food? And I told them, you don't have to worry about it because as long as people eat, they'll have a job. And thinking about food as the pure unit that we measure, like we think money makes the world go around, but no, it's energy, it's food, it's no peace on empty stomachs, right? And so right now I'm in this phase of thinking about sustainability as a mindset, but also a very important route to take when we want to actually be embodied and be true leaders in our communities is like having that relationship to food. It's just necessary and it's not something to look down upon. So yeah, I resonate with that of transitioning from lifestyle choices to a career and now back to lifestyle. I'm just that grandma in a garden now, and I'm not ashamed of it.
No, I love that. And yeah, like I personally, I am the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, born and raised in Ohio, and my mom was actually raised on a very rural farm in Taiwan. And yeah, I feel like similar, like her upbringing, and connection to the land and our motherland, kind of really informed the way that I was raised in Ohio and appreciating the food that's put on the table and not being wasteful when it comes to any resources and really thinking kind of beyond myself as an individual in her own bubble, but someone very much connected to, her community and the environment. I remember in, I think, second or third grade, like I was getting really upset about all the water we were wasting at the beginning of a shower, waiting for the water to turn warm. And I asked my mom, I was like, can we do something about this? And we like problem solved together. So we had this green bucket that we would use to collect the cold water and then go to the next room and put it into the washing machine so that when we do laundry, it can use less water. And that's a practice that we still use to this very day. I wanted to water plants, but our bathroom was on the second floor, and my parents were like, we're not doing stairs with water. But yeah, so we did the laundry method. So just little things like that where, I kind of had an idea, saw a problem, and my parents were like, yeah, let's be more sustainable in our just like everyday practices. And I just love like the automatic, like when I go to shower now, like I go to the green bucket first. Like it's just part of the routine and instilling those little practices from when I was 6, 7, probably to now. And yeah, I think that very much like planted the seeds for sustainability and environmental justice being a key value of mine. Um, and yeah, I think like being second generation Asian American has, really shaped the way thinking about like equity in our society, which is really about outcomes, right? And ensuring that historically marginalized and underrepresented, underserved communities have the necessary resources to thrive. And even under the AAPI umbrella, there's a lot of inequity among different ethnic groups. So in my political education recently, learning about those discrepancies and how certain communities might be disproportionately harmed by different environmental policies based on where they live, which could be tied to class, which could result from various prejudices or like language access or inaccess, or historical policies that disadvantage one group. Like I'm starting to spiral now, but that's really like just how everything is just so interconnected. So yeah, I would say my identity has definitely been shaped, has shaped my perspective on sustainability and equity.
Thank you so much for that. It is so helpful to ground us as we move into the other conversations. And so much of what you all shared resonates with me too. I mean, I grew up in Maine, and just even in the 80s and the 90s, just having a state that our culture was very much to save, and you know none of us in my elementary, middle school, we all had little cloth bags to carry our lunch in. Like that was the cool thing to have, not one of these like paper bags or whatever it was. So yeah, so thank you all so much for sharing. And I wanted to this next question, I wanted to start with Priscilla, but feel free, for Dominique and Angela, if you want to jump in as well. But it's so interesting too, just thinking about, when you mentioned your family being a refugee family, and Angela, when you were talking about your second generation family too. Priscilla, I was just wondering, how do you see the voices of marginalized communities influencing sustainability efforts? And I think you talked about that a little bit, but what role does civic participation play in shaping these initiatives too? Just what comes to your mind?
So much to say on this. I'll try to not take up the entire microphone time. I think to what Angela was saying before, it's very much ingrained in cultures, especially immigrants who come here. Just from a US standpoint, I think it's very easy in sustainability spaces to start looking at other cultures, other countries, and start uplifting things like, oh my God, look at how they do rainwater catchment. Oh my God, they wrap their food in banana leaves. And then people over there look back at us and be like, we're not doing this because we want to be sustainable. That's just, we don't have any other choice, right? We don't have US imperialism providing us cheap oil to do plastic for everything, right? And so it's like that tension of wanting to celebrate the innately sustainable things that people do without romanticizing it, without forgetting that these things have lineages and histories and reasons, right? Just like Black Americans in the US have carried forth habits that are deemed cool, but were just born out of necessity. And so I think when we talk about centering marginalized voices in these movements, we have to be mindful of, does that do a service for them? Are we platforming them? Are we burdening them with, the responsibility to educate us on how to be sustainable? Are we inadvertently putting people at risk by giving them the microphone? I know in Minneapolis, in recent months, those who have seen Operation Metro Surge and the invasion of ICE, people talk about the right to protest and how certain spaces are white and they should be, because it's not safe for people like me or others who belong to certain communities to be on the streets, right? And so there is a time and place to talk about marginalized voices influencing the movement. And I think it's so important when we talk about sharing space and paying homage to where ideas come from, especially when it comes to sustainability. I mean, certain lifestyles were here before the US was a thing, and there are certain practices that should be taken forward, but I don't think we should just like blanket statements say all marginalized voices should be on stage, right? So I think it's all a matter of having that discernment of how our voices show up, where it's appropriate for us to show up, and being mindful of who else we can share the mic with. I think for sure, personally, I've been definitely inspired a lot by abolition and Black communities here, talking to Native elders in the garden, learning where my food comes from, the history of the eggplant, like simple things like that, where we take for granted these stories we've told ourselves or that schools have taught us. I think that's where I find the most value when it comes to thinking about how voices influence the way I see movements, is that it's the conversations I've had. Truthfully, it's the Instagram content I've consumed, and thinking about the parasocial relationships we have. And I don't think we should shy away from talking about that either, is that some of our teachers live on the internet. And I think that's okay. I think that's a wonderful thing. And we can talk more about AI and data centers and technology and education on another conversation, but I'll pause there. That's what kind of goes through my mind when I think about voices and sustainability.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. No, and for everyone listening in, with Priscilla, Angela, and Dominique, I mean, we could have so many more conversations, and I hope that we will into the future. Here comes my family. I was warning everyone that might happen, but life is life. But Priscilla, a couple of things that you mentioned reminded me of. I often reference a book called Of Blood and Sweat by Clyde Ford, that talks about before the American Revolution, when the Europeans came to colonize the United States, they reproduced this idea of the gentleman, of the wealthy class, and they were really, really bad at farming. And that it was, through stolen knowledge, it was through forced labor, that literally they were able to survive. And I'm now reading a book, Black AF History, by Michael Harriot, and it talks a lot about this same issues that you were mentioning. And so I definitely recommend both of those books to everyone. And I wonder, Dominique and Angela, if you wanted to chime in, but I do have my next question for Angela, but please, I definitely want to hear if anything resonated with you based on what Priscilla just shared.
Yeah, Priscilla, really love, you emphasizing like we shouldn't be placing a burden on the marginalized voices to educate us and to teach us, and to decolonialize our lifestyles and society. And yeah, I think, ethical storytelling is something that, as comms people, I think we have very much like ingrained into our practice of making sure that when we are telling the stories of different communities, we were really empowering them to have agency in the way that they share their voices. And yeah, just making sure that we're not like co-opting their stories with harm, I think is really, really key. And yeah, I guess for like the role of like civic participation and kind of shaping sustainability initiatives. I think with my comms hat back on, I think some really like obviously voting in every election, local elections, is key to shaping sustainability efforts in your community, whether you're voting on the issues themselves or the leaders who support sustainability on their platform. Um, but I think something that um, I love telling my friends to do who may not be particularly involved in politics or their community, but who may be passionate about issues is, sharing their voice and their opinions through something as simple as a letter to the editor in their local paper, which especially if you're a student, it can sound like intimidating if you haven't done that before. But it's like a really straightforward, low pressure way to get your voice out and to make sure that the issues that you care about are at the forefront of your community. So I think that's just a small little tactic that I think people can take away.
Thanks so much. And so, Angela, I did have another question for you. And again, same thing, Dominique and Priscilla, please feel free to if things come to your mind too. But so you have been in working for civic participation organizations. You've now moved to Chicago to be part of this AAPI organization, which is just so incredible. So I was just wondering, if we listened more closely to specific groups or individuals, how could that help improve sustainability efforts in our communities?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Regina. I think a lot of the work that I do is in community organizing, which is really about organizing people and also about organizing money. Um, we, I think we focus a lot on having the people power to move certain issues and to make our demands clear, but I think organizing money is a piece that we often forget about, I think, especially when we think about power and our relationship to power. I think relationship to money, I think, is also a whole separate conversation with capitalism and everything as part of it. Um, but yeah, so yesterday actually I learned of this place in my neighborhood called Global Gardens. And their goal is to improve access to fresh organic vegetables for newly arrived refugee families and their urban neighbors. So it's a 1 acre farm that has 58 plots for refugee families. And then they also have 6 plots for market farmers. And the market farmers also donate a portion of the proceeds to the refugee community and just community at large. And as I was learning about this through this mutual aid network that I joined, they are providing land, they're providing tools, seeds and trainings. And, this project is really about building on the traditional strengths of refugees from rural backgrounds to create food security, economic opportunity in this new place that they call home. And I just thought that was really, really beautiful that, many refugees have fled persecution and war, and they're encountering new struggles when arriving in the United States. Priscilla mentioned ICE earlier. In Chicago, there's Operation Midway Blitz that's been happening. So, coming to this land with language barriers, with difficulty finding employment, and yeah, all this terror from the state and the systems, having this place for refugees to be able to farm and cultivate a sense of agency and community, and especially for people who were formerly farmers. to really experience a reconnection to land and nature. I think that's just something that I just learned about less than 24 hours ago. So that's something that I've been really thinking about and grappling with, especially thinking about Earth Day and just the way that we are, yeah, interacting with community and our environment. So I think that's one example of how, building community with refugee families and at the same time, improving the sustainability of our community through these gardens and organic vegetables that are being grown with the hands of our neighbors, I think is, I think that's just something that's just been on my mind, very fresh.
I love
That's lovely. Please, Dominique. No, I'm saying that's lovely.
No,
Please.
I really love this question. I really like the way that you've articulated your answer of like the direct service as a way to, forgive me, direct service as a way to learn. But I also think that nonprofit organizations can serve as political education hubs for folks as a way to like learn more about one, candidates that may or may not align with sustainable practices, because some of these organizations do give out endorsements to candidates that might be progressive, regressive, or somewhere in between, or maybe not stand anywhere when it comes to these sustainable practices. So I think that's one of the many ways with which you can engage with an organization in your community to learn about what's happening and who is happening to be involved with what you actually care about.
Yeah, +1 to what Dominique and Angela said. I've noticed this in my personal life, especially when it comes to refugee diaspora communities who come to the US, attain some form of the American dream, and then disengage because they don't have any bandwidth to bite the hand that feeds them now, right? They're comfortable in middle class, or they're just still in survival mode. And I think that's very real for many who are in survival mode. They don't have time to be thinking about long-term sustainability. They don't got time to be thinking about policy. And they definitely don't have time to go vote when it's during working hours, right? So I agree with Dominique that there's so many opportunities through the nonprofit space to educate, engage with multilingual resources if they have them, and talk about more practical examples of how sustainability shows up. They might not care about zoning legislation, but they do care if their composting bill goes up. So I think rooting it in the economic and material world has been a great successful strategy in my personal life that I've seen. And it seems like you all have seen that work too. So yeah, back to you, Regina.
So insightful. And, keeping certain groups in survival mode is the plan. And I know we've brought this up, throughout the conversation with the three of you, that capitalism does require an other. It does require people to grind, to feed the fire for the benefit of others. And so that definitely resonated with me. And it's really interesting when I think about marginalized communities and I think about, the first groups, the first individuals who were here on these lands. And I am so often in, conferences or just small group conversations with people who are trying to, figure out better ways to be more sustainable, to, reduce food waste, to, fill in the blank solution. And these are really valid. And whenever I say one of the things I think we need to do, again, to use your term, Priscilla, for those helpful, to not romanticize, but to bring in the voices of Indigenous, of Natives, and because their voices are suppressed. Not that they're going to save us, or maybe they don't want to, but it's been so completely ignored, suppressed, that we would all benefit from that. And I often get just blank stares. And so I often wonder, do people agree with me? Do they think I'm wrong? But there really is no engagement. So if you ever want to shut down a party, just, try to offer that as something for people to talk about. But also I was thinking about, just today, our national office is in Baltimore, moving 10,000 pounds of surplus food with a pop-up farmers market that was designed specifically by and for the community The whole way that these produce markets look every week in Baltimore is because of the direct input of the little kids, of their guardians, of the people who are running to and from, trying to get their kids from school to the next place. Baltimore County being one of the counties, all across the United States that has the highest rates of food insecurity. And it's a success because it's what the community wants, it's what they've asked for, and they continue to give that input to us. And we were able to move lots of, surplus food that otherwise would have just, gone into landfill. So my next question, I want to start with Dominique, and again, please feel free. I think we get the trend here. But Dominique, I was wondering, what indicators or beacons of hope have you observed that suggest progress towards sustainability in your area? And I think maybe I don't know if you're new to where you are in Massachusetts, or maybe just other communities that you connect with. What are some practices that you believe should be seeded and propagated in communities to foster a more sustainable future?
Wow, this is a really great question because one of the things that I get to spend time doing outside of my day job is coaching basketball with high school girls. And when the latest iPhone had dropped, I was really adamant about telling girls, I'm like, listen, let's make sure that we're not getting new iPhones because of what's going on in Congo, the Sudan, and so on. And it's funny because one of my girls was just like, Coach, they were talking about that on Baddies the other day, which I just thought was crazy because they're meeting the kids where they're at, talking about sustainability, talking about freeing Palestine and all those pieces, and they're meeting them in a place that I would not have expected. But my athlete knew exactly what I was talking about, and it didn't have to be this highly educated webinar that was put together for anybody, which I'm just like, that's great. So that's one avenue that people are learning. But I am slowly but surely getting connected to like what's happening in the community. My mom is an executive director, and they've got a food pantry that they've got up and running, and have been kind of helpful in trying to plug Food Recovery Network to the local colleges around us, because Springfield is kind of a not food desert, but does experience food apartheid. Um, and then in my work life, one of the ways that I've been trying to learn, because I haven't been in this like working in the sustainability space for a while, but it adjacent with voting and now looking at data, the conversation around AI. In my organization, they have a group called the Black Hive, which are Black identified individuals, queer, trans, TGNCI individuals that are doing sustainability, addressing the climate crisis. And the biggest thing right now is addressing the climate crises around these AI data centers that are being built, and how that's just like taking up a lot of bandwidth with our natural resources. And there's no one that not no one, but given some of the spaces that I've been in that are pro-capitalism, like Afrotech and whatnot, they're really excited about this AI coming to be, but there hasn't been conversations about the equity that's tied to it. Like, we are all young, gifted Black folk really excited about championing AI, getting ahead of the curve, capitalizing financially on it, but not really taking the time to look at what they're trying to do in Prince George's County, Maryland, by adding an AI data center out there. And then in our rural communities with our brothers and sisters, very Wakanda core. And I've been working to be in my personal life a good steward of how I'm using AI to help me in my day to day. I have to admit, ChatGPT is a banger with finding recipes to make for dinner, because cooking every day is such a hassle, such a task. Um, but I'm doing my due diligence to be someone that is connected in my community. I'm trying to get a garden going because I know that I want to be able to see the food that I'm getting every day, and I know that it can be something that's can feed my neighbors. As someone that does now have a house, and I've gotten to know my neighbors across the street, my neighbors next to me and whatnot, and I've already given them some eggs because we're allergic over here and can't have them. So that's one way that I've been building community. I'm just like, here are these things that I can't consume. Let me not throw them away. Let me offer them to you. And it's helped to build a greater relationship with the people that I live with and will see every day.
I love
Oh,
that you
great.
brought up. Oh,
No, please.
I love that Dominique brought up AI and data centers, which Priscilla, you dropped it and you're like, we're not gonna go there. And I was like, let's go there. Because that's definitely something that I personally am very passionate about and fighting against the rise of all these data centers and all the billionaires trying to force those into our communities and making us bear the brunt of the utility costs, the water, the air quality, just like all draining all of our resources to power, I don't even know what, nothing helpful or useful. And back in Ohio, uh, they're right, right after I moved, a group of rural Ohioans, grassroots group, they started to collect signatures to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that bans the development of data centers in Ohio. And that's not something that any of our established C3 nonprofits were a part of. It really was just a group of community members who saw the effect that AI data centers were having in communities across the country, in Ohio. And yeah, just getting together with the people power to say, no, we're not having that in our community, for economic reasons, for environmental reasons, for health reasons, for so many reasons. So I think going back to like the other question of, listening closely to specific groups and individuals, I think that was a really powerful example. Of that. And then I guess for me, kind of thinking about fostering a more sustainable future, I just finished reading a book called Everything for Everyone. And yes, Priscilla, it's a really fascinating book, that it presents itself as the oral history of this new world. So in this book, there's been war, famine, climate catastrophe, and economic collapse, that resulted in insurrections that led to basically the collapse of capitalism. And in that collapse of life as we know it, emerged a collective alternative as the new social order in the form of communes that had people collaborating and coordinating food and housing and personal care, healthcare, and just, you know, essentially flourishing in opposition to the state and to capital and living that vision of collective action. And I just really appreciated reading this book in its visioning of a new world and what is possible. I feel like whenever I'm talking to people and I'm asking them, what their vision is of a better future, a lot of the responses I get are within the confines of capitalism because that's kind of all we know, right? And we don't know how to stretch beyond that. And this book really challenged me to imagine something, that's just so different, and just so much better. And I think that gave me a lot of hope, and just, yeah, being immersed in this world and imagining, what could be possible, for our society, and maybe not in 2026, but I feel like we are on the verge of some kind of collapse. So like maybe soon, who knows? Um, and yeah, I think just in starting now and kind of imagining what's possible outside the structure that is capitalism, so that once that opportunity arises, we are ready, to build something better for ourselves and for our community. Um, and yeah, hopefully one day we're not dreaming of that future, but we are living it.
I'm pretty inspired just listening to all of you talk about what books you're reading, the initiatives you're taking, whether that's growing a garden or talking to communities. I think that's the most important thing is that we have to remember it's not the thing that will radicalize people, it's the space they have to grow and learn that will make people move and change. Like Food Recovery Network did radicalize me in many ways, intentionally or unintentionally, but it brought me closer to adjacent movements. It brought me closer to labor organizing. It brought me closer to climate justice groups on campus. And I think that is what's most important, is that people have a third space to go to so that they can grieve in community, they can learn in community, learn skills that are so important. I think when people think about the revolution or sustainability, you're like, oh, I gotta go start a garden, I gotta go build my own stuff. And it's like, yes, tactical skills, like tactile skills are great, like learning how to use your hands is great, but equally important is governance and learning how to handle conflict, which is inherent when you try to start up an FRN chapter or try to build a community garden. And so I love the book that Angela mentioned because it doesn't provide you solutions. That's the trap that many of us are taught, that you can only move once you have a certain amount of certainty. And that every time you want to say defund the police or like take down monocropping and big ag, people are going to throw back at you like, okay, so what's your idea? And we have to remember there's so many experiments happening and the seeds have already been spread. There are so many things propagating. It's just a matter of us plugging in and being that bridge for others to plug in. And I think that's a beautiful thing when it comes to programs like FRN, is that there is already infrastructure for people to plug in. There's a wonderful parent organization that has resources. And so I think that's what gives me hope and what I've seen work to inspire communities. Back to your question, Regina, of like what practices should be spread. It's that act of introducing people to what already exists. I think that's a really powerful thing for fighting despair and apathy, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that lowers the stakes, that lowers barrier for entry. And I think that's the first part, just getting a conversation going. It sounds cheesy, but like, yeah, talking to your neighbors does make a difference. And that's not the way things are structured. We're not meant to know our neighbors. Everyone has their own little unit. Everyone drives everywhere or takes public transport, and it's completely silent on the bus, which is nice. But like, yeah, breaking down, making eye contact, please make eye contact. Data centers have been a really great rallying cry in Minnesota because we're an ag state. There's lots of farmers, lots of rural communities who are being targeted by data centers, and it's brought people close, whether or not they're MAGA or not. Like, rural communities are not a monolith, y'all. And I think that's one of the things that's been brought forward, is that there is potential to organize outside of the metro areas. And it's been wonderful because I think we all can agree that AI is a lovely tool, but it should be doing my taxes, detecting cancer, not creating my art. So everything is so nuanced, but it's been lovely to see how these tensions in community have brought people together in ways that have been accelerated and maybe for the better, even if it seems really overwhelming at the same time.
Oh, thank you three so much. Yes, the idea of, when we do think about our cities, not necessarily suburban or rural, but there is something so wonderfully inefficient about cities that I love so much. That you do have to slow down because people are not necessarily speaking the same language, and you cannot have the assumption that they're going to. That, yeah, sometimes the lines in the grocery store are long, or you have to wait for the thing that you want, like a tennis court, for city courts. And I do love that idea, but next week I will be talking about an approach that I came up with called the diagram of yes, and how to get what we want, especially when it's like these big ideas. We see a future where everyone has what they need, but how do we get there? And one of the things that I talk about is that you got to come correct. Are you the pot stirrer? Are you the generational trauma person that is, yelling because you're mad about something that happened to you? Valid. But are you preventing? Are you the one who's actually preventing? So you gotta come correct and take stock of some of the things that are harming you, so that you can come into some of these spaces with the best intentions to help all of us. I'm really so proud as a Mainer to say that in front of Janet Mills, the governor of Maine right now, the Maine legislator put forward no data centers in the state of Maine. Maine is being, targeted because it's cool there. It's cold a lot, I will say. As somebody who grew up there, it's cold a lot. There's a lot of land there, and there aren't a lot of people there who live there. So it's a state that's being targeted, and the people of Maine have rallied together to say no. And I do think about, as you said, like data centers, there's so much wonderful things that they can do for us. But we're not bringing everybody along. And I think if we had done that, we probably would have, been able to do all this without such extraction of our natural resources. And it reminds me of that song, I won't say the full name because I think it's a little derogatory for like general pop here, but by Gil Scott Heron, about a white person flying to the moon when, here on Earth, people are being, bitten by rats in their apartments because they are slums, or people are sick and cold and don't have enough food to eat, but here we are going to the moon. So what does it mean when we can, bring all of us together? And then the last thing I wanted to mention is an organization that I love so much called the Visionary Organizing Lab. And I went through a workshop with them. So you go to their website, they have workshops all the time, but there was a whole entire workshop about visioning what comes after capitalism. Before it can happen, we start to talk about it. It does show up in small places, and we can begin to seed and reproduce the good things. But what does that look like? We didn't always have capitalism. We had an agrarian system, we had feudalism, and things collapsed, things changed. So maybe we could think about what can come next for all of us. Okay, so I did have a couple more questions, but I wanted to somebody in the audience had a question that I wanted to bring forward. And if others listening in have questions, please feel free to ask questions. We'll get to them if we can. But the question is, so this is a little bit of a pivot, but I think it does talk to the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the hour, which is, can you basically have luxury and luxury goods and still be sustainable? And what are your thoughts on this kind of situation of luxury and sustainability?
I love this question, and I love what you shared in the Q&A, Priscilla, as well, around the natural fiber movement. But something that some conversations that have popped up recently was around green luxury, this idea that a lot of the materials that you need that are sustainable are meeting the certified B Corporation type of standards, they tend to be more expensive. And so they err on the side of luxury. Like if I'm thinking about pants like the brand Everlane. They make really nice jeans. And the first time I ever heard about them was working at Food Recovery Network because Katie was like, yeah, these are really good jeans, this and that, blah, 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 made from cotton. And I was like, okay. And I own a pair of Everlane jeans. I've had them for forever, like 5-6 years now. But it comes down to like I try to take care of my clothes as much as I possibly can. Like it becomes opting out of fast fashion. I know people love Shein. I know folks love the TikTok shop. I know folks love to be able to buy something quick and easy off of a certain like place just because it's quick and it's easy and it's convenient. But we in the United States have the privilege of being able to access goods and services that at a rate that people in other places just don't because we have access to credit, and it's already showing up in how much debt people are in at a time like now. So I think luxury and being sustainable will kind of go hand in hand, but it locks people out who are already doing sustainability by thrifting, going to clothing swaps, buying clothes at a secondhand consignment shops like a Plato's Closet or your independent consignment sort of shop. So there is a way to get into it, but I think that there are folks who are trying to grift and make maximize profits on it, but that's capitalism doing capitalism's thing and keeping people out who are doing it because one, they're either poor or that's something that they grew up with, but it's a sustainable practice.
I love what you mentioned at the end there, Dominique, how capitalism will always reinvent itself and then extract the good things and rebrand itself as the good guys, right? Especially when it comes to streetwear. I contended with this a lot, how they've just kind of co-opted homeless, unhoused aesthetics with like tattered clothing, mismatched clothing, and like made it couture. Like what? So I definitely think luxury can be a thing, but again, it's rooted in the history of extractivism. Linen used to be peasants. That's what peasants wore, and peasant is not used derogatory here. It's what certain social classes wore, and it's very mindful to think about the bifurcation of how fashion aesthetics signifies where you belong or don't belong, and that's determined oftentimes by the state. So yeah, I definitely think luxury is sustainable, but it's been commodified, so that's why there's a higher price tag. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all.
So helpful. I got this at a consignment store, my top here. So very, very much into that world. Okay, so thank you to the person who posted that question. Please, if you have other questions, so I'm gonna kind of go back in for a second with I think we might have time for one or two more questions if we did like rapid fire. But again, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but within the impact of climate change. So for the group, what specific inequities do you foresee as climate change progresses? And how can we address those disparities that might arise?
The biggest thing that's coming to mind for me, which I don't even know if anyone's thinking about this, but the gaps that will grow in education because of children who live where hurricanes are happening or really freak of nature climate events are occurring. Like, I think about when I was in college, I went to school down in Florida, so Hurricane Alley, if you will. And I remember when I went in my freshman year talking to people who were in their like third and fourth years, they're like, yeah, we never had any hurricanes, this and that, yeah, yeah, yeah. By the time my junior year and my senior year came, we were out of school for Hurricane Maria, Irma, and Harvey. That's not in the right order, but all of those hit at a point and we were out of school for I was home for about like 2.5, 3 weeks in September just because this thing had happened. Whereas like my peers, like Angela, who's in Michigan, isn't even worried about that. Maybe she'll have like a snow day of some sort, but just thinking about the extreme weather events that will occur that will cause gaps for kids that live in these climate planes.
And I love the idea too that I think it was young kids, young people in Montana, was it, that sued their state government over sustainability issues to say, you have made our state, our lived experience not habitable. And you are directly responsible for that. So that reminds me of that, Dominique. Priscilla or Angela, do you have anything that you want to add to that? And it's okay if not, because I have one last question. Great. Okay. So it is the capitalism question. Again, we've sort of been talking about it a little bit here, but as we how has the shift into a capitalist economy impacted the sustainability efforts within your communities? And I think we've done a really good job of pulling out some things to counteract that. And we did, especially with the fashion question, talked about how capitalism takes what it wants, repackages it, and makes it shiny and new. But just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe this can be our last question for the day.
I would say in the US, it's becoming more and more clear every day that everyone is impacted by capitalism. I think before many parts of society were insulated from the effects, and even with the war going on right now in Iran, oil prices have spiked everywhere, and yet many parts of the US still function more or less the same. People still drive to work, people still go to school. There hasn't been an air of austerity that has touched us quite yet. And so when it comes to sustainability efforts, there is a place for urgency, and I think we have to act like our house is on fire. But even in terms of crises, it's important to slow down, because if we're regulated, we can make good decisions. And so this, like you said, Regina, this grind, this is wearing many of us down. Burnout is very real in the movement, but I think we're more aware of it. And so I find communities to be more supportive of repair and rest, and understanding the efforts are a long-term investment. And so that's how I see it influencing. Like, capitalism is very much front of mind for people now. It's entered mainstream rhetoric. It's not a left issue now. It's more of like this kind of sucks. Like, I can't afford basic needs anymore, no matter what my income is, for the majority of us. So I think it's altering our relationship to time And for many good reasons, right? We hear all empires collapse after an average of 250 years. We can't even fathom that. Our human brains are not meant to comprehend large numbers, but our relationship to time is something we can grasp with every day. And so I find it helpful to see that impact of capitalism on the movement is that we are moving through things in a pace that feels more intentional. I'll pass to Angela.
I don't know how I can follow that. I think you said it all, Priscilla. I'll just echo what you said and what I just put in the chat of, rest is resistance and, really like thinking about sustainability and like really the sustainability of ourselves and what we put into our community and the movements that we're involved in. Healing is such a big part of this work. And yeah, I think, as I'm starting a new chapter in a new city, in a new job, I think that's been on my mind of how to prevent that burnout and fatigue, and to make sure that have the energy to be in this fight in the long haul. So yeah, I don't know. You said it all, Priscilla. Good job.
Yeah, I would say that what's missing is bartering, getting back to a place where we can leverage each other's gifts and talents to support one another. And I think that's something that here in my city, folks I would say might do pretty well. But there are ways to as prices keep going up, the cost of gas, like there's going to need to be community. You're going to have to get to know your neighbor in some way, shape, or form, especially if you see them all the time. Like if you are riding the bus and you see the same person every single day, I think you ought to get to know them, because I hate to get all like maybe morbid, if you will, but the reason that with the whole case finding Savannah Guthrie's mother, who was missing in Arizona, New Mexico, it's because she didn't show up to church, and people reported there just like she wasn't here on Sunday, and we're worried. That could be something, you could be that person for someone in your community and not even realize, because you see them every day, when sometimes our families are dispersed in such ways. Like, now is the time to talk to one another and learn who we are, just because like we're not meant to do life alone. And this journey of sustainability is ever changing, and we just have to be in community with one another.
Goosebumps throughout. Priscilla, did you want to say?
One last thing.
Yes, please.
Love Dominic for pulling that out. We hear these words like mutual aid and building community, and it's like so big. Mutual aid does not have to be rooted in theory. Like something as simple as that, knowing who's on your bus, who's in your class, who's on your, like, it's so simple. It does not be this grand thing. And it's very simple. So I don't want folks to come away like intimidated by the big issues we've talked about.
I love that. Thank you. And we'll leave it there for now. Such incredible words. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, Dominique, for spending your time with me, with all of us here listening in, and to everyone in the future listening in. But thank you all so much for your time and for these wise words that I know will help all of us, and I know they've helped me. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much.